Hello guys, it's Chum. We're doing another Bakugan discussion, finally another BakuTech discussion, or BakuTech video in general, but yeah, I had this idea where I wanted to make a video where I just talked about, basically, can I make a monotype deck for every single attribute just using BakuTech? It's kind of a stupid idea, but I wanted to do it anyway, just because. Before we get into this though, there are a few ground rules. First up, I'm not doing cards. I know this is kind of a big part of deck making, but here's the thing. A lot of the cards are in Japanese. I don't know what every single card does because of that. And it just would make this video a lot longer. A lot of other people probably aren't going to have these cards. I mean, let alone the Bakugan, because these things are expensive now, but yeah. There's just a lot of extra oddities with cards, and I don't want to get into all of the specifics with that, just because I do feel like it's difficult to manage those especially. Again, with how rare some of these are, a lot of them aren't going to come with the cards anyway. So I figure we'll just, I guess, get a middle ground where we just don't count them. We're just talking about kind of the physical attributes of these Bakugan. So support and stuff won't be really accounted for here, except for like one unique case, but yeah, we're just going to avoid those. Anyway, also I'm not going through G-Power variants. A lot of Bakugan have stronger G-Power variants. I'm just not going to get into all that, because again, that would just add on, because like a lot of these Bakugan have stronger G variants, and I might mention it in a few cases when it specifically seems relevant, because certain Bakugan might be meant for G-Power battles. In those cases, I'll mention it, but anything else, just, they're out there. You know, like a Flare Dragon, for example, which isn't even in this video, but like there's 700G Flare Dragons, while normally it's like barely 500Gs, but yeah, we're not going to get into all that though, just because, again, it'd take forever. Next up, Sextavinal. This thing, I'm not counting Sextavinal in my ranking video, or not ranking video, in this video. I don't know why I said ranking video, whatever. Anyway, I'm not counting it here just because it can be every attribute. It has 6 metal pieces. It's a very good attacker. Also pretty bulky. It's not, I mean, it's kind of big as well. Like, not huge. It still occupies some of the card, but yeah, it's pretty bulky. So it kind of is a bit of a tank, but not like a crazy defender or anything. But yeah, it's just really good, and basically every attribute except maybe the best one would probably benefit from this thing, so we're just not going to count it because it gets boring and repetitive. But just keep in mind, for most of these decks, yeah, this thing would slot into pretty much anything as a good attacker, or, you know, plus kind of being sort of tanky, but yeah. Now that said, the attribute setup. So basically I have 2 categories for every single attribute. The first category are kind of the staples. These are the best Bakugan that if you're constructing a deck, you're probably going to want these. And then there's a second category, which are kind of just extra Bakugan that I think are really good and are worth considering for your team. The staples are basically just like 1 or 2 Bakugan, so it's not enough for a team. And while yes, BakuTech, you can actually use multiple of the same Bakugan. We're not doing that here. We're just going to use different Bakugan for each slot, just to, you know, make things a little bit more interesting. But also, since, you know, 1 or 2 Bakugan is not enough, these other Bakugan will be able to fill out the additional slots. But I will have more than 3 mentioned per attribute, but I will kind of construct different teams and then get to what I think would be kind of the best overall team. But yeah, I still want to mention some extras. The only case where this does not apply is the best attribute. I will be going in order from what I think is the worst to best attribute, but the best attribute, that's a whole mess, because there's just so many good Bakugan there. We'll cover that when we cover that, but that one won't follow these rules, but yeah, that one, that'll be something else. But yeah, for now, let's go ahead and get in the video. It's been like 4 minutes already, and it's just been set up, so yeah, let's go ahead and get into the first attribute here. Alright, first up we have Subterra. This is, in my opinion, the worst attribute. While it has more Bakugan than Ventus does, I think Ventus is just overall better. Subterra, you don't have much going for you. You have like 2 Bakugan that I consider staples, and one of them is kind of sad, honestly, but the first one that actually is really good is Jebafudo. This thing doesn't really have any attack going for it or anything. Or, yeah, nothing of the sort. It's just a defensive Bakugan. Even then, it's not like a big occupancy Bakugan either. It's just that it has the second magnet here, and it's an absolute tank. This thing is not going anywhere. That's what makes it so good. So, yeah, this thing is obviously a staple. The other staple for Subterra, in my eyes, is Aquos. So, for each attribute, certain staples are better than others. Some staples are like just very, very good, you know, necessities for anything really. Like it's a meta staple in just BakuTech in general, like even just mixed attribute teams. But for certain attributes, again, like Subterra here, you don't have a lot of options, so basically something like Aquos is going to have to do. Now this is still a very good occupancy Bakugan. Still pretty defensive. I mean, you could swap these parts out for metal, obviously, that's what you should probably do. But yeah, this thing is very good at occupancy and defense, and I guess it could get some attack going, but like we're not really gonna count that too much. It's not like that big of a deal. It's mainly for occupancy, so yeah, this is kind of necessary. Like there isn't really any other reason to why you wouldn't use this on a Subterra team. Now we have kind of the other two Bakugan, which you could use one of these two if you wanted to, yeah. First up is Gavleonicon. This one is, I think it's one of the most underrated Bakugan in general. Not like, it's not, I'm not trying to say it's like top tier, like crazy good, but I think people underrate it and just think it's like very, very mediocre. It's actually solid. You do have these metal pieces here that are built in to the feet. Also have a metal piece on the head and tail. This thing has 4 metal pieces. It makes for a solid attacker. This part kind of springs out. I guess I can help with pop-up force if you know, roll it the other way, like roll it backwards effectively. That's something. Also, in terms of defense, you have 3 metal pieces, including this one, touching the ground, and then this 4th one is fairly low, which is good. Occupancy, it's like kind of long, so yeah, it's not a bad Bakugan. Basically, everything about this Bakugan is actually pretty solid, but it doesn't do anything like crazy good or anything. Like, yeah, it's just kind of an all-rounder. I don't know why I'm taking so long to describe that. It's an all-around Bakugan that's just good. Yeah, it's nice. So it fits into the scene pretty well. It's also like probably the best attacker you really can get for Subterra, if we're being honest. I know there's like Zack Jaguar, but I don't think it's very good. Even Zack Jaguar Kai I don't like, so I think this is the best one you're really going to get. Alternatively, there is Kappa Kodaku from Bakugan Armors. Yes, I'm counting Armors Bakugan in this video. This thing is a very okay defensive Bakugan. However, the big thing with this is it has an ability called Overraid. This allows you to move to adjacent cards, so you can move this thing around, and basically you have some trickery there, so you could choose what to do, how to do it. Kappa Kodaku is pretty good, I would say. So, yeah, again, you got the trigger going on with the, I mean, the fact that you can kind of just move this thing around, like that's pretty good. So, depends on what kind of team you really want, obviously, like these two, for sure. And at 3rd slot, if you want the trickery and just kind of movement, I guess, with, you know, different gate cards, you can use this guy. But if you just want a solid team, I'd say Gavleonicon. I kind of prefer this. I know Kappa Kodaku's ability is really good, but I feel like you just don't really have a lot going for you in attack. And I get Subterra, you don't really need attack. Like, you don't have to have teams that are perfectly balanced. You can go like all in on offense or defense if you feel like it. But personally, I just like having this guy. I don't really care for. I know Overraid's ability is really good. Like Overraid's great, but like I don't know. I've never been the biggest fan of it. So that one's a very good ability to use still. But this team, in my eyes, is the best Subterra team overall. Again. A lot of these are debatable, so some of these just come down to personal preference, honestly, but yeah, this is my Subterra team, effectively. Alright, now we get to Ventus. Ventus, this attribute's pretty good for what it is, but unfortunately just doesn't have a lot of, you know, Bakugan in it, so you're pretty limited, but for what you have, I'd say it's still pretty good. First up, we have kind of the one staple Bakugan here, which is, Gogaryu. Yes, there's a Ventus Gogaryu, so this thing is kind of insane to have. Gogaryu is one of the best attackers in the game. Pretty much considered the best pure attacker. I would argue there's one other one that we'll get to much later that I would say is in contention for that spot, but regardless, it's like the best attacker, or at least tied for the best attacker in the game, so yeah, it's obviously great. Next up, we have kind of all the other Bakugan, which is an interesting selection here. First up is Nino de Shao. This thing is very odd, because it has two modes. The first mode is genuinely awful. This other mode here, this is terrible. This is absolutely worthless. There is nothing good about this mode in the slightest, so yeah. You want the other magnet mode, which is this thing. And that thing is very powerful, and when you roll it, it like jumps off the card and attacks. It'd be the best attacker in the game if it was just this side. It's ridiculous. But it's not. Now that said, you can learn magnet positioning and get better at like judging distance, and by doing that, you can get this thing to be more consistent. However, not a 100% thing, obviously, so there is still that risk of the other side, which is why it's not like a staple of, using Ventus Bakugan, but it's still very, very good to use. Next up, Windmill. This thing is incredibly hard to use. It's kind of a weird curve shot attacking thing. It's a very, very awkward Bakugan. I was good with it for a time, but I haven't used this thing in a long while, but it's still very, very good regardless. Definitely takes some time to get right. It's a difficult Bakugan to use, so I understand people not wanting to use it. However, if you know how to use it, this thing is a top-tier attacker, in my opinion. I don't know if it's quite like Gogaryu tier. However, you can do a lot of things that others can't. I mean, curve shot attacks, I feel like they're just harder to deal with, and when you have something that I would say is a top-tier attacker that also has that, this thing is just really, really difficult to deal with. So yeah, I just think it's something at least worth considering and potentially learning, especially if you want to use Ventus Bakugan. Trifalco, this thing, I would recommend using the red Trifalco over this one. This one has like a weird bump on the tail, which is supposed to be like a feature, but it's not very good. There's different modes. There's kind of its, smaller mode, which is like this, effectively. It's smaller, can be used for double stands, and low G stuff. This mode is, surprisingly, it's kind of better for attack, but also occupancy. Then this mode's for defense. I would say this is its best mode, personally. Solid all-rounder Bakugan, with potential to just, mix up your approach, plus you also just do have the option for double stand or low G stuff, so it's just a good utility Bakugan and an all-rounder. It's a solid choice. Again, would recommend the red version, though. And lastly, we have Kalukin. This thing, it's kind of just good for double stands, but also the attack of this, like, kind of just the movement of this thing. The cross parts are diagonal. You can kind of tell when it's like, well, it's like partially closed still. These cross parts are angled downwards. That gives it a very interesting, like, rolling pattern, so worth using. Also, again, can be used for double stands. Has a couple, cross pieces that, I mean, if you're going to use the, the curve shot stuff, it should be metal, not plastic like it is here, but still. Still a good Bakugan to use. Anyway, as far as a team for Ventus Bakugan goes, Gogaryu is obviously the centerpiece of the team. But as far as filling it out, personally, I think you just go like all in on attack and use Windmill and Nino de Shao. However, the problem with this is that both of these are very awkward to use. So honestly, I mean, I wouldn't be, like, I wouldn't argue with someone if they said, like, this is their Ventus team, which is perfectly fair. I think either one works. Any mix of these works. It depends. This is better for consistency. Or you could, like, maybe swap out, like, Kalukin, for example, and have, like, this guy. This is also very good. This is probably, like, the best setup, I would say, if you don't want to learn Windmill. Because you could learn magnet positioning and stuff with Nino de Shao. It's not, like, overly difficult. But me, personally, this is my Ventus team. I'd probably need to practice with Windmill again and try to get as good as I used to be with them. But, yeah. This is what I would say is probably the best, assuming you, like, know what you're doing with these guys. Alright, next up is Haos. This is where we start to get some really good attributes. So this one, the two staple Bakugan are absolutely incredible. The only way this thing struggles is really with its third Bakugan, but, like, the top two here. First up, there's a Haos Jaibafudo. I don't need to say anything more about this, we already talked about it. It's an insane defensive Bakugan. But I also have Nagadaja. This is one of the kind of, I guess, big three occupancy Bakugan. It's gigantic, as you could tell. It's also very low to the ground. This thing is just so hard to crit KO. Even hitting its magnet, it's difficult to move this thing. Yeah, it's not like the best attacker or anything, but occupancy and defense, it is genuinely ridiculous. So definitely a great Bakugan, and yeah, these two are great. So now getting a third Bakugan is where we run into some difficulties. So who do we use? I mean, there's obviously the, a choice like Sextabnal, but I already said I wasn't going to use that. So anyway, other options here, probably the next best thing, in my opinion, is like Ogre Leonis. This thing is pretty good. You got a couple metal pieces on it. It's big. It kind of has like an oval shape when it's closed, which kind of makes it, I guess, a little bit better for attack. And yeah, this thing, it's a solid attacker. And it's also pretty large, so defensively and for occupancy, it's not bad either. Just another kind of all-rounder. It's solid to use. If you want a little bit more defense, I would say Shield Leonis, although it's kind of small and it's not the best Bakugan, but if you just want to go all in on defense, since the other two are defense, then this one's like a solid choice. And then lastly, we got here Blanchelt. I probably recommend, using this part. It looks like a metal cross piece, but yeah, this thing, it's actually surprisingly heavy for what it is. It's a good attacker, so if you want like attack, this is a solid choice. I would say though, use Blanchelt Kai if you can. That has metal pieces here, and that makes it extremely heavy. So yeah, it's a good attacker. Yeah, Shield Leonis is a little bit more situational, but I think either Ogre Leonis or Blanchelt, especially Blanchelt Kai, are very, very good options to use as a third option in a Haos deck. So yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of the, these two obviously, but yeah, like, again, if you want pure defense, probably something like this. If you want an attacker, something like this, and if you're going to want a little bit of a mix, then I'd say go with this. This is my personal preference for a third option, but again, you can kind of go with one of the other two, especially Blanchelt. I think Blanchelt might be the more popular pick overall, so that one is definitely worth considering over Ogre Leonis. However, again, down to preference, and this is what I would say is preferable, at least for me, for a Haos deck. Alright, now we have the third best attribute, in my opinion, Aquos. Aquos has, again, two really good Bakugan, and then you have, for that third slot, there's like 4 other Bakugan that are all, like, also really good, so Aquos has a lot of good stuff going. First up here, Gogaryu, again, I already talked about this guy with Ventus. This thing is an incredible attacker. And the other one that I'd say is a staple is Bury Beyond. This thing, it's kind of just a wall. You can hit this thing off from, like, the sides or back. Although the back, it's actually a little bit harder from the back. Like, from the sides, though, it's possible to knock this thing off, but even then, it's still difficult to deal with, I would say. And from the front, this thing, yeah, it's a barricade, but not only that, it can really just block off all sides of the card. Yeah, like, even horizontally, this thing works. And then, like, at worst, you hit this, like, an edge here and it, like, moves or something, but, like, it's not going to flap the card from that. Yeah, this thing is just a really good defensive Bakugan. And yeah, also, if there's, like, a Bakugan at the edge of a card, like, if it just landed awkwardly, sometimes the barrier can, push it off, which is cool, but, like, that's a little bit more of a edge case right there. Moving on to the kind of what to use for a third spot. First up, Buddha-Gil. This is the obvious choice. It is a very strong Bakugan. When it opens, like, you have this tail and also the neck. These are both, like, really, really powerful springs, so when it opens up, there's a good shot that it just knocks them off. This was kind of more of a offensive Aqua setup here with Gogaryu, Buddha-Gil, but then you also have Bury Beyond for defense. Now, if you want a more defensive setup, that's where Daifujo comes into play. This thing, it's very low to the ground, very, occupancy heavy, and I don't like how this thing looks. I just don't, but anyway. Yeah, this thing takes up a lot of the card, as you could probably see. Fairly tanky. It takes a lot of the card, like what else is there to say? It's a good defensive Bakugan. So if you want more defense in your Aquos team, this thing's a good option. Next up here, St. Aquos. St. Aquos is kind of... Well, you have 4 metal pieces, at least potential ones. I mean, the soul pieces, then, I mean, there's also, like, the neck and tail also can be metal. So you have 2 metal pieces on the ground, 2 very low to the ground. Fairly large as well, can be kind of tanky. But again, 4 metal pieces, also some, I guess, decent pop-out force. Not, like, great, but okay, I guess. Makes an okay attacker, so it's pretty solid all around, but, you also have some low G stuff you could do with this thing, so it ends up being fairly unique, so you get an all-rounder and some low G stuff. So again, can complement the other 2 by being kind of a middle ground in a sense. Next up, we have, well, I guess the last one here is Hadokayo, another Bakugan Armor's Bakugan. This thing is absolutely abysmal, physically. I guess it could be used for double stands. I guess with, like, the metal soul pieces, you could do, like, curve shots or something, too. Sure, but, like... It's not good. The main reasons why you want to use this one, though, is for its ability. Blow Away. When you land, you can basically take a Bakugan, like an opponent's Bakugan on a card, and return it to their hand. It's kind of a meme. Yeah, this thing is absolutely hilarious with what it can do, because it can just, like, clear out a field, to some degree, so... This thing's very funny. Now, for an Aquos team, again, there's a lot of ways you can go about it. So you have offense and defense here. If you want to go, again, more into offense, I think this is the best way to go. And this is probably like the best standard Aquos deck right here, right? Like, this is really, really good. But again, if you want to go more defensive, you got like things like this. Again, kind of the more balanced route, plus some, you know, low G fun times, which, I mean, like, low G stuff's always funny. You got this, and it's also just more balanced, as I said. And if you just want to be kind of a troll, this is a fun setup, because, I mean, you have really good offense, really good defense, and then this thing. This is actually my preferred setup here. I just like Blow Away. It's a funny ability. Yeah, it's a good time. I will say again, Buddha Gil is probably the standard third option, and, well, I guess price-wise probably should be, because I know Hadokayo is not cheap, but still. If we're talking a best Aquos deck, this is probably what I would say is that, because again, Blow Away is just kind of broken, although it's balanced out kind of by Hadokayo being horrible physically, but, I mean, it's at least something like a double stand, I guess. It has some utility in that regard, so it's, like, pretty small, but yeah, it's an awkward Bakugan, but I just think Blow Away is good enough to warrant that. Alright, now we get into Pyrus, the second best attribute, for sure. I think top 2 are pretty clear, but yeah, this is the second best. So the only staple here is really Giant Dragon. This thing is great. In terms of attack, it is not the best overall, not like top 2, but it's like right there with them. It's really, really good. Definitely a top tier attacker, and then defensively, it's also pretty good. Not like a top tier defender, I would say, but it's like pretty close to top tier. But then you get like both of those in one. I mean, you got like mode changes and stuff too, but like, you know, so you might have to deal with those as well, but like, it's fine. I mean, you still have all of it in one Bakugan, so who really cares? Yeah, this thing's just really good. Attack and defense. I'd recommend probably using like the wings down. I have them up right now, but anyway. This thing is great. And this one is one where the actual color matters here, because I have this translucent Dragon from the Bujin Dragon, from the, what's it, the Battlefield's Kwami set. That's important because it's 720 Gs. And then also this Dragon piece from the Friendship Bind set has an extra, just a random, like, plus 30. Just for absolutely zero reason, it just does. Wish I knew why. They just gave it to it. And yeah, this thing is a 750G Bakugan. The highest typical G-Power Bakugan are 720, so having 750G Bakugan actually does matter. I know Armors does beat it, but still. Considering just how good this thing is physically, also having 750Gs, that's insane. This thing is great for attack, great for defense, and great for G-Power battles. It doesn't get much better than that. This thing is for sure a staple Bakugan. Then we have like 6 extra options for the second and third slots in the deck. First up here, what I would probably say is the next best Bakugan is Made Last Boss. This thing's also good G-Power Bakugan, being 720 Gs, but yeah, anyway. It's really small, but it is decently bulky, because it's like a few metal pieces, but yeah. You got like 2 metal pieces under here, you got the one back here, all pretty low to the ground, makes it like decently tanky, which is nice. Also the back part can of course move, which can, you know, give you different curves and stuff, which can make this thing an interesting Bakugan to control. Also, it's deceptively heavy, so it's a really good attacker. So yeah, it's a really good attacker that's also just tanky and has some, you know, high G-Power stuff. Has the, you know, utility of this back part spinning, so, you know, you can, you know, change up your spin and whatnot, which, that was a horrible sentence. Okay, my bad. But, you know what I mean. Yeah, it's a really good Bakugan. Kind of continuing the trend of attackers here, we have Gigahorace. This thing is fairly large as well. It's like pretty good for, I guess, occupancy, kind of. At least like horizontally, I guess. Anyway, it's pretty big. It's fairly bulky. You got like 6 little metal pieces on this thing as well. It's a good attacker. Also, you can move these around to kind of balance the Bakugan, or I guess make it less balanced if you want to. So you get more control out of it, or again, just make it balanced, which is probably the best way to go. It's a solid attacker for sure. Next up here, we have Rise Dragon, another fairly bulky, larger Bakugan, which is always nice. You have crosspiece on the back here, plus the horn. It's pretty good for attack, and also it pops open a lot, so again, you know, it has some good pop-out force. It's just a really good attacker. Next up we have Kachiya Gel, kind of similar to Rise Dragon, except it just has the one metal piece, so it's not quite as good in that regard. It's also a little bit less big, a little bit less tanky. Oh, it's still like decently defensive, I'd say. It stays on the card fairly well. Anyway, the main draw of this thing is the head. It does that, and yeah, it's a very, very powerful attack. Big fan of this. We got G Ganorada, another attacker. Yeah, there's a lot of Pyrus attackers. Who would have thought it? Who would have thunk it? Why did I am talking stupidly today. Anyway, let's get back to the actual Bakugan stuff before I say something else stupid. G Ganorada is an interesting case, by the way. So the cross parts themselves, I have to kind of pull this thing back, okay. The way that they're set up is to basically be very balanced, which is good. So you have a very, very balanced attacker, like, you know, the weight's balanced. So it rolls very well. The gravity ring helps with that as well, which is nice. It's a strong attacker. Also, it opens up well, because basically when it opens up, this sort of comes down and helps it from, like, going too far off the card or something, so that's nice. And also, I wouldn't consider this a defensive Bakugan, but it does have pretty solid defensive utility with this thing kind of being on the ground as well, so not a defensive Bakugan, but still has solid defense anyway. It's an attacker though, so yeah, don't use it for actual defense. And then, finally here we have Rekahiryu, the last real Bakugan to go over, which is good. So anyway, this thing is basically a very, very mediocre attacker. Even if you swap these out for metal soul pieces, it's still not great. You have these metal blades as well, which is like decent enough. The main draw to this thing is that it's 750 Gs and also has a special ability, as Armor's Bakugan do. Has an ability called Plus 100, which is great. Basically, this makes it an 850 G base Bakugan, which is better than most other things. Better than like basically anything aside from like Dio Civic plus, you know, Savic, or like Zeta Moonicus with like a 200 G Zeta Roulette. You know, that's basically it. This thing is incredible. Anything to beat this would require like cards or something, so, or like, you know, gate card bonuses. So, and a lot of gate cards are just kind of the 0G, you know, gate cards where you just don't get any bonuses, and in that case, this thing is like nearly an auto win on its own. So, very, very good Pyrus Bakugan right here, for sure. As far as team composition goes, obviously you kind of have to use Giant Dragon. There's like no reason to not use this. Aside from that, though, I would say Maybe last boss, very heavy attacker, very good to use. And then outside of that, all these are attackers. You could definitely use Rekahiryu just for the extra G power. And kind of go with this guy with 750 Gs and, like, you know, to have high G power. And this guy's 720, so, like, it's a pretty high G power team. But personally, I like attack. And I'm going to put Kachiya Gel right here, just because I think Kachiya Gel with this thing is, in my opinion, the next best attacker. And with this, you have a really good attack-heavy team. Also some good G-powers, and Kachiya Gel's not quite there, but still. I just think with the pop-out force, it is a very, very good Bakugan to have on your team. Again, you can swap this out with any of the other 4 that I showed, but this is my personal choice for a kind of best Pyrus BakuTech team. And now we get to the best attribute, Darkus. That's not a shock, this is the best attribute by far. So this breaks kind of my system where I had, like, you know, the top 1 or 2 Bakugan as a staple, then I, you know, presented some alternate Bakugan. Now this thing, there's like 6 Bakugan that are all, like, top tier here, plus like 4 other really good Bakugan. So we're just gonna go over all 10 of them, talk about kind of the different roles and whatnot, then I will construct a team out of it. So anyway, first up here, Darkus Dragon Dragon. Yes, this is a Darkus version. It's also 720 Gs, and I had the plus 30 Dragon piece on it. So you have a 750G Darkus Dragon Dragon. Now that is not something that should have happened, if we're being honest, but it exists. So here it is. It's a good all-rounder, definitely something you should probably have on the team. I would say, regardless of what you use, this is like one of the best. Again, it can, you know, attack, defend, has, you know, good G power. It's just a very, very good all-rounder. I already talked about this one though. Moving on to our pure attacker, and that is Sanzu Halibos. This thing has 2 metal cross pieces, or 2 metal soul pieces, 3 metal cross pieces, and then also these 3 horns here are metal. It's also 36mm Bakugan. This is the heaviest Bakugan. It is a literal bowling ball. This is what I have in contention with Gogaryu as the best attack type, or best attacker, I mean. I know a lot of people will probably say Gogaryu's better. Personally, I kind of disagree. I actually kind of prefer Sanzu Halibos, if we're being honest, but they're like right next to each other. They're both top tier attackers anyway, so this thing's just ridiculous. It's just, it has less pop-out force than Gogaryu, but again, it's just so heavy. It's the heaviest Bakugan, so yeah, this is a very good one to use for sure. Next up, we have our couple defenders here. We have first up, you know, our other 2 members of like the big 3 big 3, you know, occupancy Bakugan. Of course, 2 of them are Darkus, but anyway, Yodansha 4 is one of them. It's very, very large, as you can see. So yeah, also says the extra utility of having more modes. The only other one you need to worry about is like the first mode, which is like this, where it's smaller. This is good for like double stands. If you want to, you know, switch to that, but for the most part, you know, you're gonna use it for occupancy. And it's, you know, like this, and it's very good. However, I actually don't think this is really worth using a lot of time. I think this is kind of a fraud. I know people say, like, you know, Nagadaja, Yodansha 4, and Ozpress like the big 3. I don't think this is really part of it, if we're being honest. I think it's just like a big 2. As good as this thing is, and what does have the double stand utility, I just think that Ozpress is better by a long shot. So you don't get the utility that you get from Yodansha 4, like the double stand stuff, but you do have another very large Bakugan. It's slightly skinnier, so it might be ever so slightly easier to crit KO, but even then, you're probably not crit KOing this thing, let's be real. Also for a brand, this thing, I mean, it's just likely not going anywhere. Can it cover a horizontal part of the card? Yes, it can. It also sticks out a lot when it does it, though, so it's not like the best thing ever, but still. It's just a very, very large Bakugan. However, when it opens, it opens, if I can get it correctly here, like this. It pushes forward. So, this can crit KO Bakugan. It's a giant Bakugan. You know, one of the best occupancy Bakugan, again, kind of, again, with that name, Big 3. But also, it's very good defensively, but then it can also attack. Now, that said, it doesn't have the strongest attack, but anything that's like a 32mm Bakugan, assuming it's not like hyper defensive, it's off the card. It's gone. I still do recommend, like, kind of shooting this thing hardly. Like, just try and act like you're going to crit KO this thing with the ball form itself, which isn't going to happen, because it's a little bit too late for that. However, if you slam into another Bakugan, there's a good chance you might at least destabilize it a little bit, and then when it opens up, there's a good shot that the rubber band pushes the Bakugan off. I've had this happen with some great Bakugan, even good defensive Bakugan. This thing is genuinely a menace to society. The only time this thing doesn't work as well is against, like, other things that are like Nagadaja or maybe like Jabufudo. Like, maybe like these super top tier defenders, it's not gonna, you know, crit KO, but here's the thing. This thing's also top tier defensive Bakugan on top of being kind of a menace with attack, so I think this is better than both Nagadaja and Yoran-Shifor, and it's way better than Yoran-Shifor. I think Nagadaja is definitely the best defensively for sure. It's better than this thing, better than, you know, Yoran-Shifor, but this thing has both. It has both attack and defense, and it plays to a very high ability for either one. If you want to use it for pure defense, you can. If you want to use it as an attacker, well, you have a lot of extra defensive utility out of it, so go for it. This thing is incredible. Next up, we have our G-Power Battlers. First up here is Zeta Municus. This is the Friendship Bind Set version because it has 730 Gs in its base form, which is the highest of any non-Bakugan armors Bakugan. So again, very, very good. Also, it is a very solid Bakugan. It's solid for attack and defense. Decently bulky, got metal on the bottom here. It's like kind of, not that big I guess, but yeah, whatever. Still a solid attacker, you know, it does its thing. But the main thing is that it's a G-Power Battler. It's at least decent enough all around, and then has that on top of it. 730 Gs in base, that's pretty crazy. Zeta Roulette, 2 of the 6 chances give you 10 Gs, so it's 740 Gs against beating everything else aside from Armor's Bakugan, the 750G Jagandrion, or, you know, Diocivic plus Savic. Also, you know, 2 of the 6 chances are 20 G boost, so that's 750 Gs, that's, you know, par with Jagan. You have a 1 in 6 chance of getting 770 with a 40 G boost, and the last one is a 200 G boost, which is, you know, 930, which is insane. This thing's a very good G-Power Battler while also being a solid Bakugan overall, so very, very good. Other G-Power Battler here is Yoran-Shifor. Not Yoran-Shifor, am I okay? Yashadagaris. I looked for the wrong Bakugan when I was talking. Yashadagaris is pretty bad physically. Actually, really bad physically. This thing doesn't do much of anything. However, it has the highest potential G-Power. This thing is 770 Gs. It has a 710G variant, but 770 is the peak of it, so we're going to go off that. So 770 Gs, that's higher than Dragon Dragon, it's higher than Zeta Municus in base, that ties its 40G boost even. So the only things that beat this thing in base are Rekahiryu with plus 100, Diocivic plus Savic, or Zeta Municus with its 200G boost. This thing is ridiculous. However, we're not even done. So there is counterplay to this, which again you can use like the all 0G gate cards where no one gets any boosts, which that does counter this thing pretty well. However, again, it just has such high G power that a lot of times it's just going to win anyway. But if you are using gate cards that have boosts, well, first up, you know, I mean, it's armors, so you could switch out the attribute if you want. But again, for the sake of this video, it's Darkus, so okay. Its ability here, Free Select. Free Select is why I did not include any other armors Bakugan on here, because plus win, plus light, and times 2 are all just negated by this thing. Free Select allows you to choose a second attribute bonus. Any of them. You get your Darkest one, and then you get to choose, you choose another Darkest one, you could choose, you know, any of the 5 other attributes, you just get a second bonus that you get to pick from. Again, if this is not a gate card where everything is just 0 Gs, this thing is ridiculous. Even on an opponent's gate card where they have, you know, maybe their best boost and it doesn't line up with Darkest. Maybe Darkest has 0 and let's just say Haos has like 300. Okay, well, they get their 300G boost. Now you get to take that as well with Free Select. And it's more than likely going to lead to your, you know, victory because you have 770 Gs in base. Plus, you know, you selected theirs. And again, if there's any bonus for Darkest, you just win. Unless it's a hyper-specific armor setup, or again, like I mentioned, Zeta Municus plus, you know, the 200 Gs, and of course Diasic plus Savik. This is not getting into cards again, but still, Yashadagaris is absolutely broken. Now we get to our kind of fringe choices here. First up, we have Size Tavenal. This is basically, in my opinion, a very, very slightly better Sex Tavenal, because the arms, come out like this, which I prefer to how the wings come out on Sex Tavenal. Yeah, if Darkus wasn't already broken enough, we have the one attribute where, Sex Tavenal would not, excel, just because, well, not as much anyway, because of how good Darkus already is. But then you also have Size Tavenal, which also just makes it, a little bit less valuable, because it's a little bit better in my opinion, so. They're both, almost equal, but still I just slightly prefer Size Tavenal, but this thing, it's not the best, since there's already so many other Bakugan to choose from. However, it is still very heavy and a good Bakugan, so if you want to go all out on attack, this is a solid Bakugan to use for that. Next up, Diasic. This also has Savik with it. Diasic, you have 2 metal cross pieces, these metal parts up here, also Savik's inside, so it's pretty heavy. It's a good attacker, nothing crazy, but still a good attacker. Fairly bulky as well, so has some tanking properties. Now, if you're going to use Diasic, you should probably use the blue one, which is 700 Gs. I don't have it, but if you want to use this thing, that's the best one. 700 Gs plus Savik is 220, so you can beat 920 Gs potentially, and that makes this thing an absolutely insane G-Power battler. So another good one to add to that sort of niche. Bone Skulls is another one. Got metal on the bottom here, metal on the top of the crosspiece, gives it pretty good balance, and it's an okay attacker. It's also very large. It's okay defensively, all if you hit from the side, it's done. Still, pretty decent defensively though. Again, just a very large. It's a decent Bakugan as is, however the big thing with this thing is that it has a special gate card. And I know I said I wasn't counting cards, but this one's a special case because its gate card is a low G wins gate card, which doesn't make much sense at first. This is like an average G power Bakugan. However, the gate card is a second special ability, which is basically if Bone Skulls is on its own gate card, Bone Skulls becomes 0 Gs. So this Bakugan becomes 0 Gs on a lowest G power wins gate card. It's a troll strategy. So yeah, it's potentially at least worth considering in that regard. And lastly, you got Borg Mahesis. This is like the weirdest choice here, but I wanted to mention anyway. The cross pieces are on an angle, like with Kalrukan, making it kind of good for curve shots, kind of an interesting attacker. Also, it's fairly defensive, fairly large, so that's kind of nice as well. It's a decent Bakugan. You can honestly replace this with like Hollow Municus if you want to, but I prefer this one just because I feel like it's better physically, at least personally. And there you go, that's all your Darkus options. So to make a couple teams out of these, you can really mix and match with this setup, but I think you kind of should use Dragon regardless. You can go hyper defensive and just use both of the long Bakugan like this. I think that's like a pretty solid move to do. You can go all in on attack. Where's my other attacker? There he is. All in on attack like this. You can go all in on using funny strategies like this, or even replace like one of these guys with like Borg Mahesis for the sake of control and just oddities or whatever. Also for G power battling, you can I guess you can keep Diasic if you want to, but I would probably swap him out for Yashadagaris. This is an insane G power setup because you have 2 of the highest G power battlers, with the potential of this guy being like 930. This thing's ridiculous. So yeah, a lot you could do here. As far as my ideal Darkus setup goes, I'd probably choose 1 defensive Bakugan and 1 G-Power Bakugan, and I'd probably just keep Dragon Dragon. As much as I want to use Sanzu Halibos, because it's like one of my favorite Bakugan, I think I'm just going to keep that one out and do this. This is probably what I would say is the best overall defensive setup, just because I think, again, you have an absolutely broken G-Power Bakugan. On your own cards, it's an auto-win. Dragon Dragon, this thing is just an insane all-rounder with very good G-Power as well. And Ospress, this thing's ridiculous, and in my opinion, highly underrated. People already say it's like really good, but even then, it's underrated. People are sleeping on this thing. It's absolutely broken. So yeah, that's the Darkus stuff. I know this Darkus just took forever, but there's just so much of Darkus, I had to take forever on it, honestly. So with all that said, those are all of my monotype teams for BakuTech. I know this video took a long time, but there's just a lot to say about this. There's a lot of different setups you could do. I didn't get into everything again. I skipped out on cards, G-Power variants. You could see this video is already a long time. You could probably understand why I did that now, but yeah, there's a lot of different oddities here. Again, where do you want to put Sextavinal on these teams? You could add him in. There's also a lot of different setups you could do. If you want to do like hyper aggressive or defensive setups, there's probably other Bakugan you could choose from that I didn't even mention here, but although those, if I didn't mention them, they're probably not the best, but you could still maybe use them. But anyway, it's just a video I wanted to make just because why not, and yeah, there you go. Those are all my monotype BakuTech teams, so hopefully it was interesting to hear about, but yeah, for now, that's it, so thanks for watching, and bye-bye.